Hello, everybody, and welcome to Positive Fandom. I am your host, Mmmm, and today, of course, we are continuing our Horatio Hornblower Season 1 review, starting with Episode 4. And with us today is Darth Plato. Hello, Darth Plato. How are you?
Good morning. I'm well, and thanks for having me on. Good morning, chat.
Well, it's great that you're here, Darth Plato, and of course, you and I are continuing our historical review series here with Horatio Hornblower. And guys, we have plenty more reviews coming up here on Positive Fandom. And I hope you guys all were able to check out the rebroadcast of All Quiet in the Western Front that Darth Leto and I did a review of that I put on the Burnettwork. We're going to be rebroadcasting the Devotion review as well soon. So that's coming up along with a bunch of other things that we have planned. So 2023 is going to be a great year for these sorts of shows and, video and everything. So certainly do continue to check that out. Now, Darth Plato, the last time we left off talking about Horatio Hornblower was for episode 3. This is going to be episode 4
Well,
called Frogs and Lobsters. And
yeah, I just wanted to say I apologize for the clickbait nature of the video. The Frogs and the Lobsters isn't actually a video about marine biology.
No, it's not. No, it's not. And of course, it's referring to something that's going on there at the time, I guess in the late early 1800s,
1795.
where you have a situation between the French and the British.
Mhm.
And of course, these are slang terms for the soldiers. The frogs are the French, and
Yes.
the lobsters are what we would call the redcoats. But I guess anyone could call them redcoats or British soldiers, armies.
Yeah, that was a term that the Navy used for the Army.
Exactly. And what's so interesting about this episode is that Horatio and finds himself sort of in the middle of what is really a very serious situation. Um, According to the Admiralty, the British Admiralty has asked Pilyu to escort a royalist, a very famous royalist, to France in hopes that he could restore the monarchy, essentially get the country back from the Republicans, who have pretty much are running the country now. So it's
Mhm.
the French royalists versus the Republican royalists. What am I saying? The French royalists versus the French Republicans. And the
Mhm.
British Army and the British sailors must assist these French royalists so they can take the country back from the French Republicans. I just wanted to say it all out because if I don't do it that way, it's impossible to understand what's going on.
Yeah, by the French Republicans, you mean the French Revolutionary Government, yes.
Absolutely, yeah. So, but they call them Republicans in this particular book. So I'm not
Mhm.
quite sure whether at the time they were known as Republicans or
They
Revolution.
were. They were, yes.
Yeah. So so it is interesting to see that, but um I think it's very funny. They make a point of mentioning that it's been what, 5 years, a really long time. Darth Plato, do they even have a chance of ever getting the country back, the royalists, at this point, realistically?
I don't see why not anymore. France was a different situation. Um, the king was dead. And that was in 1793. We saw that in the first episode of Hornblower. Since that time, the government was formerly the Dubois in the Low Countries. But what we learned is there really was a situation and the help of the British Navy. The internal yeah, it's like an episode place 1797. The fourth episode is taking place in 1795, so we're actually going back in time. Yet the internal chronology of Hornblower's experiences is continuous. So the showrunner for
Oh, looks like we lost Darth Plato. Well, I'm just going to continue talking about Horatio Hornblower. Maybe he will rejoin us. So essentially, what's happening is that King Louis's army wants to invade France, that's now run by these Republicans, these revolutionary people, and Captain Pellew, who is the captain who Horatio Hornblower, amongst the other officers like Archie serve under, have been told that they absolutely have to support this French colonel who is there, and they send a writ that lets them know what's happening. But interestingly enough, what we observe is that while the writ has been sent out to inform them that this action is coming, it gets intercepted. And I'm assuming it's intercepted by one of the Republicans who doesn't want any kind of action taken because, as far as they're concerned, they now have the country and they are the rightful ones to be ruling France. And after 5 years, that's quite a bit of time for the country to have to go back and go under any kind of rule where you have a monarchy, does seem very like a bit of a stretch, but this is what they're planning on doing. And I think that the English believe that if they support France in this endeavor, that it would be advantageous to them in case France does manage to reinstate the monarchy. It's always ideal to have the French government as an ally since they've been at war with them in the past. So it is very interesting in that regard that even though this is the plan, the Admiralty also said, make sure you guys keep your ship close by the shore in case you need to retreat and it doesn't go according to plan. So that was something else that's very interesting. All the while this is happening, when that communique gets intercepted, and I'm assuming it's by the revolutionists who intercept the communique, it's very important because they know that this attack is going to take place. And a lot of times these attacks are more successful when you have an individual who doesn't know, or the people who you're going to attack don't know. So the element of surprise could have been critical in this case. But I don't think there would have been any surprise. Over the past 5 years, they keep trying to take over the government and reinstate the king, but it hasn't been working. So there's really tension all around this. Horatio happens to be getting his new uniform, and he really needs to get a uniform so he can finally look like an officer. So now it's kind of hard to believe that there had been people who might have been faithful to the French king for so long, or the idea of a French monarchy. But there is a lot of tension between the British army, who ends up hopping a ride along with the British sailors, and this royalist army force, this royalist French army force, along with this colonel who they have to escort there. And even Pellew, who is the captain of the ship that Horatio is serving under, feels like, I think that this financial win that the Admiralty is looking to gain may not be worth what the body count will inevitably be if things go bad. So there's another really awkward scene where you see the soldiers kind of loading up the French colonel's items so that he can bring with him over to France. And one of the items is essentially a guillotine. And I thought to myself, why are they bringing a guillotine over to France? This doesn't make any sense that would be the case. But we see that is the case. And this guillotine situation is not ideal for, looking at, because there's only one purpose to have a guillotine. It's a killing machine, but it's a spectacle style killing machine meant to kind of instill fear in people. And so it does actually instill fear as it's being loaded onto the boat. And the sailors see it and they're wondering, gee, what's this guillotine for? It's certainly not meant to persuade anybody over to anyone's side or to keep the peace. I don't think it's a deterrent. So it is obviously a very clear foreshadowing. But to be honest with you, the French colonel is not entirely nice to everyone. And the British soldiers, along with the British sailors, which includes Horatio, noticed that the French royalist army is kind of ramshackled and not really together. Um, and so, because of this, you have a British force, which includes the British army and the British sailors, that aren't fully convinced that this plan is going to work. Um, Pellew suggests that Horatio be the liaison, the person who would represent the British sailors. And what's so weird about it is just how naive, in a sense, um, that Horatio is to all of this, although he can kind of sense that something is awry. Something is wrong with what's going on. And so Horatio, in his own right, um, obviously follows captain's orders and becomes the liaison between the British military and essentially this campaign, while the French royal, let's say, the French royalist is there trying to get his property back and everything. So, hi, Darth Plato.
Hello.
So, I
Yeah,
was
that
just
was
talking about uh, how the even the British Army and the British sailors are not that confident in the colonel, and certainly don't feel very good when they see that guillotine being transferred onto the boat. The the colonel's like, "Don't damage my stuff." And sure enough, like, a guillotine is not a friendly kind of machine. It's meant to intimidate. It's meant to bring fear
true.
to a group, and certainly that notion that he feels it's fine to kind of bring his guillotine with him certainly is a foreshadowing that's not good. Um,
True. There is a basis in reality for that. They're called the Chouans, the counter-revolutionary forces in Western France. There was an incident where they did do that. They brought it out and they were using it on the pro-French revolutionary people. So there is a precedent for it.
Absolutely. And so once they do make landfall and they realize that it's so interesting seeing the colonel's reaction, where he says, "And this is where my people will greet me." He's so convinced that everybody will be rushing out to meet him and
Yeah.
feel so happy that he's back, only to
Oh
just
no.
insult the mayor who's there by essentially grabbing him and, I guess, beheading him. Certainly not the start I think the townspeople thought would this would ever happen. But I almost wonder if the colonel thought that this was what was needed to be done anyway, in order to show how much power he had. Was he power hungry in the sense of not just wanting to return back to his home in France?
I think the script added that character and made it necessarily tyrannical. I'm not exactly sure why they did that, but it certainly was entertaining to watch at times, but albeit very brutal. I'm not aware of any instance where that really happened. There was all kinds of crazy things that happened. I don't know if it was quite that extreme. That guy was really nuts. Montcouton was his name. That is a real place though where they went to.
And so I think it's very interesting in the sense that because Horatio has been assigned as this liaison, and the Lord, who is happens to be with the British Army, is also along for the ride with him. They have to answer to this French colonel, and it's uncomfortable. They don't like it, and I think what's so interesting about it is this notion of they don't really take orders from him, but now Pilly says, "Oh no, you are going to be liaison, therefore you have to take orders." Does Horatio have a chip on his shoulder when it comes to who he should take orders from?
I think that I'm not sure if he has a chip on his shoulder about the chain of command. I think he recognizes that there's something wrong, and this isn't boding well. It's sort of presaging the future. Like you see that with Pelou, where he said, we're going to stay here. We're not going to leave." It's presaging what's going to happen. And well, if you know your history, you do know what happens. The revolutionary government retaliates pretty quickly, and things are pretty well wiped out. The whole thing lasted about 4 months, but the British involvement lasted about a month. Now, the episode, you think that the whole thing was taking place over a few days. It happens all very quickly, but they were actually there for about a month.
Right. And, it is kind of interesting. We do hear some interesting quotes in this episode where he says the mathematics of defeat, or there's even a part where one of the soldiers is terrified, in one of the first actions he's ever had. And he said, those soldiers are trying to kill us. Those guys are trying to kill us. And it was like Horatio had said, yes, they are. He says, but keep calm. And I automatically thought about, how the British always say, keep calm under so many situations. But it is also very interesting that what they kind of come up against, and I'm not quite sure how big the army is for the Republicans, but for the French loyalists, it's almost as if they don't even have an army. The idea that they were going to say, or at least they said that they were going to get 10 to 20,000 soldiers when they get to shore. It's not very certain. Darth Plato, is it crazy to even try an action when you don't even know how many soldiers you're going to have?
It is, but there is precedent for it. The Stuarts did the thing when they invaded England in the 1750s, and that's what the French did in this particular instance too. So there is a precedent for it. The Russians counted on it in 1812, and it actually played out in their favor. So the French that went into the Khyber Island, I think it was about 30,000 men. The episode doesn't really reflect the size of everything that's going on. It makes it sound like they landed at the beach and they walked to this town, and all the action involves this town and the beach. It's actually much more expansive than that. There was activity going on all over Western France. Georges Cadoudal was there. He was a significant actor in the Revolutionary Wars at that time. He's also the same man that arranged the gunpowder explosion that tried to kill Napoleon, and that we saw when we were doing our Napoleon Josephine series. So he was involved in all of this too. Curiously enough, Napoleon was offered the command of the army of the Vendée in Western France. If he had accepted that command, these French soldiers that are fighting the Royalists and Hornblower's British would have been under Napoleon's command.
Yeah, of course. And it is very interesting to see what's happening, at least in this particular episode. But one thing that I thought was very interesting is that we also see that fortunately Pellew was told to stay by, or at least nearby, in case things didn't work out. And that certainly is something that doesn't seem too odd to say to anybody, just in case they need to come back or retreat. But it does seem like there's kind of like a bit of doom and gloom over this entire operation.
Yeah.
And we even hear one of the British officer for the army say this expedition becomes more ill-fated as they're kind of engaging in this entire thing. And we do see a lot of townspeople getting killed for no reason. Horatio kind of falls in love with one of the young women who is in the town.
Yes.
There's a very touching scene where when the colonel arrives and sees that a man who either used to be the baker is now the mayor of the town, and he has these, Republic flags up, the flags we all know for France now, the red, white, and blue ones. And, the colonel orders that it be taken down, and he refuses. And I always thought it was so interesting because when he makes that refusal, everybody starts to sing, what we know as the French national anthem. But the colonel ends up killing, um, unfortunately, the mayor at that point, and a child starts to sing. And then all of a sudden he starts to point the gun at the child. And I thought, wow, this is really going really far. Was it too far? And did that even stuff like that? That doesn't even seem to make any sense. Was it going too far in the episode?
Yeah. Yeah, that guy was. Yeah, they felt it never quite that extreme, but the chose to go with it. It was hard to watch. The when the episode is, there could constantly the viewer that this can't end well. Get ready to get out of here. They're using that as a substitute for what really happened that brought British morale down to begin with, and the royalist morale to begin with. On the voyage over from England to France, a big fight broke out between two ranking French officials, Poissy and Devery. I may not be pronouncing that right. About who was going to be in charge, and one guy was producing, well, here's my letter, or here's my letter, and they were having this fight right there on the quarterdeck with the British ship. Everybody's going looking around like, what's going on? And it just sapped the morale out of the whole expedition. But they didn't show this in the Hornblower episode, so I think what they're doing is they're trying to reflect this reality of bad morale before they even got onto the beach with there to begin with. And this is just how the episode chose to take that what is otherwise a complicated situation, simplifying it in the medium of television for a casual audience.
Yeah, so I thought it was maybe even a little cruel to show that, but it is what it is, and that's what they chose to focus on, um, so that if I guess maybe it would feel more extreme. But clearly, I also think part of the reason why they did it is because they are somewhat more biased towards a republic, France. So, and that's fine. That's totally fine for them to be that way. Um, Now, what's also kind of interesting is the townspeople are just they've had it with these beheadings. Like they're enough is enough, and fortunately, there happen to be French Republic forces, hitting the town and firing at the town when the colonel rolls in. Were they the ones who stole that order from the Admiralty? Did that order ever get back to the French Republicans, revolutionaries, so that they knew that this colonel was coming to do this action?
I think that was just something they inserted into the script for the story. Honestly, I don't think there was any such incidents. The expedition wasn't very well planned. It wasn't very organized, and Britain was very lukewarm about the whole thing. They did it because it had more to be had more to do than doing something, and you get that mood. I think it was Hornblower that says that on war or something to that, and that's the British attitude at the time, and the British were
Okay, well, it does begin to get very interesting, where essentially what happens, and I guess it's not entirely unpredictable, that both Horatio and the Lord, who's in charge of the British Army, who are there with his troops, um, are not necessarily agreed with everything that the colonel's doing as he kicks everybody out of his house. He starts to punish everybody by beheading them, putting them on trial, and finding them guilty for pretty much doing nothing at all. It's quite a scary situation. And Horatio runs into Mariette, who is the sister, I guess, of one of the persons who is either going to be on trial or has been beheaded, or the child, or whatever it is. But I think it's very interesting. He kind of feels like he has to protect her. And, they kind of have a few minutes together, but it is quite ominous seeing them walk by the guillotine in the town square, knowing at any moment, she could be under that guillotine or anybody could. Um, but fortunately, the French loyalists decide to take action, and so even though Horatio and the Lord realize that they're kind of like in a very bad spot, they decide to make the best of this. Horatio goes ahead and protects Mariette as best as he can. He protects her and he says, "Look, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that you're safe." Um, and then the British army lord decides to take a stand at a very important bridge, which would make sure that if they blew up the bridge upon retreat, the revolutionaries couldn't follow them and then kill them. So it is quite dramatic at this point in the story where Horatio decides to kind of spend the night to stay with Mariette and protect her. A very kind of chivalrous thing to do. And of course, he is, I guess, maybe falling for this girl, this beautiful young woman who grabs his attention there. And it is quite tragic that, all of this, military action is taking place, meaning that she's an incredible amount of danger. So they kind of spend some time together, and I'm assuming it's romantic because we do see them kissing, and there are soldiers who are knocking on the door trying to get her attention and be with her, but he has a gun and he kind of points it in the soldiers' faces and says, "Hey, back off, you have no business here." And so the soldiers leave, but she certainly is in danger already, not just from getting beheaded, but maybe from even something worse. And so that's a concern as well. So they kind of spend some time together. He protects her, and you can hear bombs and artillery being blown at the village. And it turns out that it is the French Republicans, revolutionaries who are there, who are attacking the colonel and his French royalist forces to get them out of the town so that they cannot take over. So very tragically, one of the leaders of the French Royal Army dies in this incursion and tells one of the British leaders, "You better get out of here. This thing has nothing to do with you guys. You should get out of here. It's not your war." And it was very interesting to see that response. So Horatio goes up to the colonel and says, "Hey, maybe you should leave. It's very dangerous." And the colonel's like, "I'm not leaving anything." They had a dinner where he invited Horatio there, and Horatio kind of said, "Well, I think it's fine that if a person wants to rise above their station or make themselves better, that they can." And, of course, we see, all of a sudden the colonel becomes even more tyrannical, saying that it's ridiculous that peasants should strive for such endeavors. So, it was unfortunate that that happened. But Horatio let it be known that he did not care for the way that the colonel treated the people there. I do want to say, though, that it was interesting that the British um, army leader tells Horatio, "You know what? You need to go ahead and be a little bit more diplomatic when you speak." And I think he made a good point, because for Horatio, he's not going to be able to kind of talk back to everybody. We see even in upcoming episodes where Horatio feels the need to say something more, and often those comments, those additional talkbacks, get him into trouble. And so I think that's something that the Lord knows very well is not something that should be happening, but felt he had to inform Horatio, "You need to make sure that you don't do that anymore going forward." Did Horatio get the message? Is he going to follow that? I'm not sure. But I think it's really important to note that people are giving Horatio advice on what to do, especially since Horatio said he was a gentleman at the table and storms off. But when when the revolutionists start to bomb the town, Horatio immediately goes over to the colonel and says, "Your people need you at the front line to fight. You can't stay at home. You need to fight against this." And it is really, really interesting what happens in regards to whether or not this small army of royalists can fight against these revolutionists. The answer pretty much is no. They're not really able to fight against the the revolutionary Republicans. in France. And, it's a bad situation to a point where Horatio and Mariette end up running away for their lives. Most of the group, that means the British sailors and the British army, are on the other side of this bridge, which they're going to blow up so that the French revolutionists cannot follow them to their ships so they can retreat. So Horatio's kind of behind enemy lines, if you will. And Horatio quite heroically jumps out of a window and asks Mariette to join him. He says, "Like, I want to protect you." She runs away with him, and at a quite tragic turn of events, as they're crossing the bridge, she unfortunately is killed by a bullet from, of course, the French revolutionaries or whomever it was shooting at Horatio and her. So it is quite tragic to see something like that happen. Now, after they cross the bridge, which ends up getting blown up, everybody kind of retreats back to the British ships, and they of course realize what a failure this entire action has been. And I think Pilleux also feels that he's in a situation where this entire situation is a farce and really was not an action that anyone could have won. But it is also something to think about when, you're a soldier and you have to take these orders. So, Dr. Plato, I was just talking about Horatio's courageous actions when he decides to kind of leave the colonel, even though he warned the colonel about what was happening. The colonel is completely oblivious to what was going on, and how he decides to defend Mariette, jumping out of the window and taking her with him. But we also see some scenes where a lot of the carnage continues, but this time, in opposed to the colonel inflicting the carnage, it's the townspeople who kind of pick up the colonel and head him to the guillotine, where he kind of unfortunately becomes a victim of his own machine, even to the end, Darth Plato. And he's like, long live the king. It does seem quite delusional. It does seem quite delusional. What did you think about that part?
It was entertaining to watch this. I honestly, I couldn't tell if he was just a royalist fanatic or if he was just a narcissist, because he was just claiming to be a royalist so that he could just get back to his house, and that wasn't really his thing. It's almost a little hard to believe the psychology was going on here. So if he's a royalist, then he should have been taking better care of what was going on outside the town. But he's fixated inside the town. That tells me that he's not really interested in the royalist cause. Yet the last words out of his mouth is "Vive le roi." Okay. All right. By the way, I apologize for the internet breaking. It just started up at 7:15 my time, so I'm not sure what's going on.
Well, we also noticed that Pilleux, I don't know whether he was supposed to be offshore or how offshore he was supposed to be, but he has trouble getting back because there's no wind. And I really do like scenes where they have to kind of row the ship to get it into position, or do whatever they can to kind of get into a certain area. And even the captain gets his hands dirty while rowing as well, which I thought was very interesting. I don't always get a chance to see a captain take off his jacket and start rowing, because these guys have been rowing for hours now, right? It's been hours, right, Darth Plato?
I assume so. I don't know if that really happened or not, but it was certainly nice to see the. He knows the situation is going to deteriorate. He shouldn't know because the script requires him to know, and he's moving heaven and earth to make sure he can get his people out. And who doesn't want a commander that's got your back 150%, 200%?
Yeah, absolutely. And he's supposed to be there to get to them when needed. Now, incidentally, when you were gone, I had mentioned how Horatio managed to kind of save Mariette and bring her across the bridge, but she tragically is killed. I don't even know which bullet it was, but some stray bullet ends up hitting her, and it is quite tragic that she doesn't make it across the bridge. I was actually surprised that she got killed there. But
Unfortunately,
yeah, and she, unfortunately passes away, and they kind of have to pull Horatio away from her, or else he himself will be killed. It's quite a touching scene. They blow up this bridge, but they are kind of out in the open, right on the beaches, no cover. Darth Plato. How much danger are they in? Really, would they all have been killed by the Republican
they
revolutionaries?
yeah, no, there is a basis for that. The British ships were laying down cover fire.
I mean, before the cover fire.
Like I said, there's a very chaotic situation. There's a lot of stuff going on. So that's pretty much a translation of what really happened into the TV medium. But
Yeah.
that's more or less what happened. It
Okay.
was actually a lot worse than that in real life. It was way
Really?
more, way more chaotic than that. Way more chaotic than that. There was a terrible incident where when the British were laying down cover fire, there was bad instances of friendly fire. That also happened. They didn't show that at all, but there was a lot of moving parts here.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite episodes just because of all the machinations of what's going on.
Mm.
And honestly, because of all the actions, the military actions, if you will, between the sailors and the army and the Republicans and the French royalists. Like it's a lot of players involved. It's exciting to see everything that was going on. Of course, I do sympathize and feel terrible for those poor villagers who lost their lives. Certainly that was something that didn't need to happen, but we do see that the colonel loses his life in a very similar way, so at least they won't have to deal with him anymore. Did they make the colonel look a certain way on purpose, the
I,
character who played
I
him?
I think so. Yeah, I don't know what the basis was for that, but that was how that decision they decided to go with it. And all right, honestly, he seems like someone that would have worked for the other side. Like, okay, the battle's over, and then the revolutionaries come in, and what does he do? He starts rounding people up and guillotining. And that seems like something you would see from Robespierre, one of his people.
Yeah, exactly. But I wasn't sure when Robespierre fell out of power, and I guess things became, I'm not going to say balanced, but let's just say when Robespierre fell out of power, and we kind of see it in in the miniseries that we watched for, Josephine and Napoleon. When he falls out of power, things don't necessarily get restored back to normal for the aristocracy. I mean, they're still there, but they're not, you know, I don't even know if just because things get restored back to power, whether beheadings still didn't take place. I don't know. I mean, I don't even know whether it was just, the revolutionaries who decided to do the guillotine, or whether it was something that was commonly done anyway.
Well, to be fair, Robespierre had fallen by this time, so the government Barras was in charge at this time. While all these events were taking place in Quiberon, you had the counter-revolutionary riots in Paris, where Napoleon came out and did the whiff of grape shot that you saw depicted in the first episode of the Napoleon Josephine series. So these events are simultaneous to each other.
Yeah, it is very interesting to note that there. And, I often wondered after Robespierre, because the guillotine was such a huge um, item, a terrorizing kind of killing machine used during the revolution. I wasn't quite sure whether it was still continued to use after Robespierre was pulled away from being in charge. I wasn't sure whether that was used to kind of inflict punishment on people who they felt went too far. But certainly there is this element of where this town, they're really defenseless villagers who don't they're not soldiers, and so they're become completely victimized here. And of course, when Pellew comes back with the ships, and just when the soldiers and the British Army and the British soldiers think that all is lost, they do get cover from the British ships in form of cannons, which kind of blast away the opposing side, which was nice to see. Um, but also, one other thing that I think is interesting is I don't know whether Pellew feels that he should have been more forefront, or at least let some of these other officers know that this mission might not have been one that would be successful. Would it have been unethical for Pellew to have warned his officers, even though he was told to keep it quiet, about what the outcome might have been in this action?
Would he have when what? What was the question?
Would it have been unethical for Pellew to inform his officers that this action may have been a failure, even though he was informed by the Admiralty to keep it quiet?
Yes, well, sure. He wouldn't have been following orders for one. Also, it would have hurt morale beyond what it already was. I think because like you don't know what's going to happen in the future. He suspects that things are going to go south, and of course they did, but he can't know that they're going to go south. He doesn't know how they're going to go south, and if it turns out that they're going to be needed, then he's going to want his people to at least believe in something, rather than just what's he going to do? Gather people together and say, "I'm telling you right now, we're all screwed." He's not going to say that.
Yeah, I wasn't quite sure how he it was kind of a difficult position for a captain to be in, and to knowingly and willingly put your crew in harm's way, knowing that it may not result in anything or
Well,
be.
yeah, that's a very common in war. Where like in those days, travel time was so long that you get an order from London or DC or wherever you're getting your orders from, Paris, and by the time they get there to the commander who's reading it, and he's like, "Well, the situation completely changed. The orders are out of date. So what am I going to do?" Um, that's not uncommon at all. So that this could be one of those times. Maybe at the time that London decided to get involved in this, it looked like something they could pull up. But when they actually got to the French coast and Pelew's there and he's looking at what's going on, and he's met these French leaders, he's interacting with them, and they just seemed like a bunch of blowhards. I'm trying to find a polite word. A bunch of blowhards. General Charette, they showed in the episode. He was based on a real person. There really was a guy named General Charette. He was in charge of the French royalist forces on the ground. That is so. He was killed during those events, though not the way he was depicted in the episode. He didn't die like that. He was taken alive, and he was put to firing squad. But he was a very competent man. The other people that were around him weren't really that competent, but the episode didn't show that. So Charette knew what he was doing. The others did not. And
Yeah, and I'm sorry, go ahead.
And Pellew knew what he did.
And one final thing that I thought was very interesting was that once Horatio ends up back on the boat with Pellew, with his captain, Horatio is kind of broken. He's all freaked out, and he admits that what they did, that action was a complete defeat, and he feels quite crushed by this. But Pellew tells him, look, it doesn't matter that you've been defeated. The thing that keeps you coming back is doing your duty, and you just have to keep going on as an officer in the British Navy. And so I think Horatio is able to kind of let go of what happened and just kind of take an approach of, okay, tomorrow is another day, if you will. But it certainly was quite agitating. This is maybe one of the most agitating episodes so far for me. How about for you?
Sure, it's they got their asses handed to them. I mean, excuse the language, but that's what you expect when you're a naval power trying to play on land with a land power like France. Look, every country has a weak arm and a strong arm. Britain's strong arm is the Navy. Its army is the weak arm. It's the same way in America. The Navy is far and away stronger than the Army, far and away. And when you're putting your weak arm against the weak arm of England against the strong arm of France, France is going to win every time. And this is what you see time and time again throughout the Napoleonic Wars. Wellington was an obvious exception, and there's extenuating circumstances for why that is, but we won't get into that here. Most of the British action during the Napoleonic Wars were failures, but by and large, the Cape Landing wasn't the only instance where something like this happened. There was a lot of bad stuff that happened in those days, but the stuff that did go right was really spectacular, like Wellington and Nelson at Trafalgar and Cape St. Vincent. So they did have their victories, and they were grand victories. But that's not to hide the fact that they really took it on the chin at times. This is one of the times where they took it on the chin.
Any last thoughts about the episode, Darth Plato? I enjoyed this episode so much.
I did.
And I think it's one of the best episodes in the series.
Yeah, it's my favorite episode. This is the episode I really wanted to talk about, and unfortunately, I'm getting kind of messed around with my internet, and I apologize for that. But so this is what I really want to talk about. I will mention this though. It's kind of funny. Now, you saw the Poldark series.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there was an episode in Poldark where he left England to go rescue a friend of his that he had been taken captive in France.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when he went to France, he did so under the cover of the Quiberon Lando.
Oh,
That's what we're saying now. So it would have been funny if one of the British soldiers had been kind of like that guy.
yeah, that would have been interesting. And I didn't realize that. I have to go and see which episode that is again. I remember him doing that. Poldark was very daring, and took chances. And of course, it's just across the water, but it does feel quite like a daring adventure to go on. And I enjoyed that series as well. Darth Plato, thank you so much for joining me for this review today. Where can people find you?
It can be found right here. I'm a loyal fan of Post Geek Singularity, the Burnettwork, and of course the It Show, Positive Fandom.
That's right. And of course, guys, you can find me here on Positive Fandom on my channel. You can also find me on the Burnettwork, as well as Lorena Creel's channel and the 1/6 Scale Man Network. Just want to thank everybody for tuning in to this review of episode 4 of Horatio Hornblower's Frogs and Lobsters. And everybody live long and prosper. I can never do it with this hand. I'm so accustomed to do it with this one, but it feels odd to go across my. Live long and prosper, everybody. And guys, remember, no matter where you are in the galaxy, always remember to please be kind. Take care.
Wow.